I woke up that morning with a quiet sense of certainty, the kind that fills your chest with warmth before you even understand why. 5 years of marriage, 5 years of laughter, arguments, late-night takeout, and dreams whispered across pillows. Ethan had been working late for weeks, drowning in meetings and deadlines, but I wanted to remind him of the life that existed beyond the walls of his office. So I stopped by the florist on the corner, the one that always smelled like spring, even in the middle of winter, and asked for a bouquet of white lilies and pale roses. He had once told me that white flowers reminded him of peace, of home. The woman behind the counter wrapped them carefully in soft brown paper, tied with a ribbon the color of dusk. As I drove toward his office, I imagined his face when he saw me, surprise first, then that crooked smile that always softened his whole face. I thought of how he might take me out to lunch, or maybe we'd sneak away early, like we used to before life became calendars and phone calls. The sun was high, the air warm, and my heart beat with the quiet thrill of love that still felt young. I parked across from his building, smoothed my dress, and caught my reflection in the glass doors. I looked happy, maybe a little tired, but happy. The kind of woman who believed in anniversaries and in showing up for love, even when the world was too busy to notice. I held the bouquet close and stepped inside. The lobby smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. People in suits passed by, their faces glued to screens, their minds elsewhere. I felt out of place, but in a pleasant way, like a secret among strangers. I told myself Ethan would be proud, his wife, the one who still believed in small gestures. I approached the front desk, heart fluttering with excitement, and smiled at the security guard. "Hi," I said softly, clutching the flowers tighter. "I'm here to see my husband, Ethan Hale." The guard's face lit up in recognition, that polite warmth reserved for familiar visitors. He leaned forward slightly, the corner of his mouth curling into a knowing smile. "Oh, Mrs. Hale," he said cheerfully, "you just missed him. Your husband's wife was here about 10 minutes ago." My smile froze. For a second, I thought I had misheard. The air around me seemed to still thick and humming like before a storm. "I'm sorry?" I managed to say, my voice light, almost casual. "His wife?" The guard nodded, still smiling, oblivious to the way my fingers tightened around the bouquet until a petal broke. "Yes, Mrs. Hale. She dropped off something for him, looked like lunch, I think. Left in quite a hurry. Said she didn't want to interrupt his meeting." The words sank into me like slow poison. My lips parted, but no sound came out. I felt a wave of heat rush to my face, then drain away until my skin was cold. I'm Mrs. Hale," I said finally, my voice trembling despite my effort to steady it. The guard blinked, confusion flickering in his eyes. "Oh, I must have misunderstood," he murmured, suddenly uneasy. "I just assumed she said she was his wife." My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I laughed quietly, the kind of laugh that didn't belong to me. "That's strange," I whispered. My hands were shaking now, petals falling one by one onto the polished floor. Behind the desk, the phone rang, and the sound jolted me back to the moment. "Would you like me to call him up?" the guard asked, but I shook my head. "No, it's fine," I said quickly. "I'll just come back later." I turned and walked out of the building, the flowers trembling in my grip. Outside, the sunlight felt too bright, too harsh. Cars passed, people laughed. The world kept moving as if mine hadn't just cracked open. Mrs. Hale, 10 minutes ago. I stood on the sidewalk, staring at my reflection in the glass, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure who I was anymore. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The guard shifted behind the desk, his smile faltering into something uneasy. I could see the realization dawning in his eyes that he had said something he shouldn't have. "Wait," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I'm Ethan Hale's wife, Clara Hale. You must have me confused with someone else." My words hung in the air, heavy and trembling. The guard cleared his throat, his gaze darting from me to the computer screen, as if the glowing monitor could somehow save him. I'm sorry, ma'am," Maybe I misunderstood, he stammered, his tone suddenly formal. It happens, you know. People come by all the time. His discomfort was obvious, but his eyes betrayed him. There was something there, recognition, a flicker of truth he wished he could take back. My heartbeat quickened, a steady drumming that echoed in my ears. I tried to smile, to make it easy for him, for me, for everyone who didn't know what to say, when reality cracked open in front of them. Of course, I whispered, forcing a light laugh. It's fine. It's probably just a mix-up. He nodded too quickly, relief washing over his face. Yes, exactly. I'll, let Mr. Hale know you stopped by. I nodded, clutching the bouquet to my chest like a shield. The flowers felt heavier now, as if each stem carried a weight I hadn't noticed before. I thanked him softly and turned toward the door. My reflection followed me in the glass, pale and distant, the image of a woman trying to hold herself together in a place that suddenly didn't feel hers. As the door slid open, the hum of the city rushed in, swallowing the fragile silence I left behind. I walked slowly, each step deliberate, as if movement itself might keep me from falling apart. I told myself it was nothing, a misunderstanding, a harmless mistake. I'd laugh about it later, maybe even tell Ethan about it over dinner. But deep down, a small, sharp voice whispered the one truth I didn't want to face. Mistakes don't wear wedding rings. The car was stifling when I got inside, the air thick and unmoving. I set the bouquet on the passenger seat, and for a long time, I just stared at it. The lilies had begun to droop slightly, the edges of the petals softening in the heat. I ran a hand through my hair and exhaled shakily, trying to piece together what had just happened. Maybe the guard had seen someone else. Maybe it was all some absurd coincidence. But the way he'd looked at me startled, almost guilty, replayed over and over in my mind like a looping film I couldn't pause. I thought of Ethan, of the way he had smiled that morning before leaving for work, pressing a quick kiss to my forehead without really looking at me. I thought of the nights he came home later and later, claiming meetings had run long. The faint scent of perfume on his jacket that wasn't mine. I had brushed it off then. The way you swat at an insect you don't want to believe might sting. My hands trembled as I touched the flowers, adjusting them pointlessly, as if straightening them might restore the moment I had imagined, the surprise, the laughter, the warmth of his arms around me. But now the stems seemed limp, their color fading under the harsh sunlight pouring through the windshield. You're being paranoid, I whispered to myself. It's nothing. Still, a part of me, the part that had learned to notice the quiet in his voice and the absences that never came with explanations, knew better. I watched the petals fall one by one onto the seat, pale fragments of a love that suddenly felt fragile. The bouquet had been meant as a reminder of everything we'd built together. Now it sat beside me like a symbol of something dying slowly, beautifully, without anyone daring to admit it. I turned the key in the ignition, my reflection flickering in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back looked calm, composed, but her eyes told another story, one that was only just beginning. I sat there for a long time, the car engine humming softly beneath me, my fingers tracing circles on the steering wheel. The world outside moved on, people hurrying across the street, a couple laughing at a cafe table, the traffic lights blinking from green to red with mechanical certainty. Everything looked normal, so painfully normal. I pulled my phone from my purse, the screen lighting up with a reflection of my own unsure face. My thumb hovered over Ethan's name. For a second, I considered calling him, hearing his voice, grounding myself in its familiarity. But something stopped me. I didn't want to give away what I didn't yet understand. So instead, I typed, "Were you at the office just now?" The message looked harmless, even casual. I stared at it for a moment, then pressed send. The little dots appeared almost instantly. In a meeting, can't talk. 3 words. Quick, efficient, dismissive. But what caught my eye wasn't the reply, it was the timestamp. 10 minutes ago. 10 minutes ago, when the guard had said his wife had just left. I read the message again and again, as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. My throat tightened. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe he had stepped out for a minute before his meeting. But my gut, the quiet, steady voice I'd silenced too many times, was speaking now, low and certain. Something wasn't adding up. I typed again. "Everything okay?" But deleted it before sending. No, not yet. Not until I knew. The flowers beside me had wilted further, their once bright petals curling in on themselves. I picked one up, tracing the edge of a petal with my thumb, and whispered, "Who was she?" The question hung in the still air, unanswered, echoing louder than I wanted to admit. Finally, I started the car and pulled away from the curb, leaving the building and its secrets behind me. But the image of that lobby, of the guard's hesitant smile, followed me all the way home like a ghost that refused to stay buried. The house was quiet when I walked in. Too quiet, like a stage waiting for its actors to return. I placed the flowers on the kitchen counter, their stems bent sadly in the vase, water splashing across the marble like tears. I should have been at work, buried in spreadsheets or design drafts, but instead I found myself wandering from room to room, touching things as if to remind myself they were still mine. The framed wedding photo above the fireplace caught my eye. I stopped in front of it. We were both smiling, younger, untouched by doubt. His hand rested on my waist, with an ease that now felt like fiction. I reached out and brushed the glass, my fingers trembling. 5 years, I murmured, barely recognizing my own voice. 5 years, and I don't know where you go at night, the silence answered. I sat down on the couch, phone still in my hand, rereading his message. In a meeting, can't talk. It was the kind of thing he always said lately. Short, controlled, evasive. And yet, beneath those words, I could almost feel his distance, like a door slowly closing between us. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Maybe I had ignored too much. The new cologne he'd started wearing, the sudden gym membership, the phone that never left his pocket, even at dinner. Little things that didn't seem like much until they all pointed in the same direction. I wanted to believe it was just stress, exhaustion, anything but betrayal. But the whisper inside me wouldn't quiet down. Something was wrong. Deeply, quietly wrong. That evening, I lit a candle on the dining table, pretending I was waiting for him to come home early. I imagined him walking through the door, smiling, apologizing, making it all simple again. But the hours passed, the flame burned low, and I sat alone in the dim light, realizing that love doesn't vanish overnight. It fades, one unanswered question at a time. And tonight, I finally decided to start listening. It's strange how the smallest things can go unnoticed until they start forming a pattern. I used to think that distance in a marriage was something sudden, a fight, a betrayal, a single moment that split two people apart. But now I see it's quieter than that. It happens in whispers, in shifts so delicate you almost convince yourself they're nothing. Looking back, the signs had been there all along. Ethan's new cologne, for instance. A sharp, musky scent that wasn't the one I'd given him last Christmas. He laughed when I noticed it, saying a client had recommended it, that he wanted to switch things up. I'd teased him about trying to impress people at the office. He'd smiled, but it wasn't the playful kind. I knew it was distant, almost secretive. Then there were the longer hours. At first, they made sense. He'd always been ambitious, driven, the kind of man who couldn't sit still when there was work to be done. But lately, the late nights had stretched into early mornings, and his explanations began to blur. Meetings that ran over, dinners that came up last minute. I told myself it was normal. Everyone goes through busy seasons. But every time I woke up in the middle of the night to an empty space beside me, the silence told another story. And then there was his phone. Always within reach, always face down on the table. He used to leave it charging on the nightstand, unlocked, carelessly open to texts and emails. Now it was like a second heartbeat, glued to his hand, protected by a passcode I no longer knew. Sometimes, in the middle of dinner, his face would light up not with laughter, but with something quieter. A small smile, the kind that belonged to someone else. He'd catch himself, set the phone aside, and ask me about my day. I'd answer, pretending not to notice the echo of that smile lingering on his lips. It wasn't one thing. It was all of it. The The scent of someone new. The late nights. The hidden smiles. The feeling that our home, once filled with warmth and noise, had become a stage where we both played roles that no longer fit. I had spent weeks convincing myself I was imagining it. But now, sitting alone, the truth began to take shape like a shadow I could no longer ignore. 2 days later, I found myself driving back to Ethan's office, without quite knowing why. Logic told me to drop it, to let the moment at the security desk fade into another misunderstanding. But something deeper pushed me forward, a need to see, to know, to prove that my fears weren't built out of air. I rehearsed an excuse on the way. I'd say I'd left a notebook there, or a pair of sunglasses, something harmless enough to justify my return. When I stepped into the lobby, the same cool air greeted me, scented faintly with polished wood and coffee. The same guard was there. His smile this time was hesitant, cautious. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by discomfort. "Good morning," I said, keeping my tone light. "I was here a couple of days ago. I think I left something upstairs in my husband's office." He straightened slightly, his posture tense. "Oh, Mrs. Hale," he said, slower this time, choosing his words with care. "I'm not sure if visitors are allowed up today. There's a meeting." "That's fine," I replied quickly. "I just need to check if I left something." "I won't bother anyone." He hesitated, his eyes darting toward the hallway as if afraid someone might overhear. "Mr. Hale's in a client meeting," he said again. Firmer now. "You can leave anything you need with me." There was something guarded in his tone, something that made my pulse quicken. I smiled anyway, trying to appear unfazed. "It's really not a big deal," I said softly. "Just a personal item." But his expression didn't change. If anything, he looked even more uneasy, like a man caught between honesty and duty. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Company policy," he murmured. "I can't let anyone up without an appointment." The words were polite but final. I nodded, pretending to accept it, even as my heart sank. As I turned to leave, I caught his reflection in the glass doors he was watching me go, eyes filled with something like pity. Outside, the sun was blinding, but I felt only cold. Whatever this was, it wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. Something was being hidden from me, and I was done pretending I couldn't see it. The next morning, I woke up with that restless pull again, the one that makes your heart beat faster even before your mind is caught up. I told myself I was being foolish, obsessive even, but curiosity had already turned into something darker, heavier. It wasn't just about the security guard's mistake anymore. It was the need to know whether the life I'd built was real or just a story I'd been told. So I went back. This time, I dressed the part, neatly pressed blouse, hair tied back, a folder in my hand to make me look like I belonged. When I walked into the lobby, the guard wasn't there. A young woman with honey-colored hair sat behind the reception desk, clicking through her computer with a bored expression. I smiled politely. "Hi, I'm here for Ethan Hale. I wanted to drop something off." She looked up, her eyes flicking to the name on the folder before she nodded. "Mr. Hale? Sure, you can leave it here. I'll make sure his assistant gets it." Her tone was pleasant, routine. I hesitated. "He's in a meeting again?" I asked, careful to sound casual. She nodded quickly. "All day, I think. Between him and the other Mrs. Hale, I don't know how he keeps up." The words slipped out so naturally that for a second she didn't realize what she'd said. I felt my stomach twist. "Sorry, who?" I asked, the smile frozen on my face. She blinked, her eyes darting up at me. "Oh, I mean, his wife, right?" she said quickly, forcing a laugh. "I just meant, I've seen her around. The one who works in consulting?" My pulse roared in my ears. "Consulting?" I repeated softly. "Yes, I think so," she said, her smile faltering now. "She comes in sometimes. Works with one of our partner teams upstairs. Lovely woman, blonde." Blonde. The word hit me like a stone. I wanted to ask more, but my voice refused to move. I nodded instead, forcing a small laugh. "Oh, right. Of course. I know who you mean." The receptionist smiled uncertainly, relieved to move on. You can just leave that here. I did. The folder suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Thank you, I said, my voice barely audible. As I walked away, the world around me blurred. The sound of phones ringing, footsteps, distant chatter all faded beneath the single truth forming in my mind. There was another Mrs. Hale, and she wasn't just a visitor. She worked here. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her faceless, blonde, confident enough to walk into my husband's world and claim my name. I needed proof, something tangible. Words could be mistaken, but paper never lied. So the next day, I returned again, this time with a plan. I dressed simply, carried another folder, and wore the same calm mask I'd perfected in recent weeks, the kind that made me invisible. The receptionist wasn't at her desk this time. My chance. I slipped past the front counter and toward the open plan area beyond the glass wall. The air smelled of coffee and printer ink. Desks lined the floor, and at the end of the hallway, a door marked Employee Directory. Internal use only hung slightly ajar. My heart pounded as I pushed it open just enough to peek inside. Rows of binders and clipboards filled the shelves, labeled with neat letters. I stepped closer, my hands trembling, and spotted the directory, a thick binder with the company logo embossed on the cover. I flipped it open quickly, scanning pages filled with names, departments, and ID photos. Hale, Ethan Executive Finance. My eyes moved lower, and then I saw it. Hale, Lydia Moore Consulting. For a moment, the air left my lungs. There it was, black ink on white paper, as real as the ground beneath me. Lydia Moore Hale. The name looked wrong, like something stolen and paraded without shame. I traced the letters with my fingertip, as if touching them could make them vanish. My husband's last name beside another woman's first? Married? Pretending? I didn't know yet. But she was here, inside his world, close enough to use his name like it belonged to her. I closed the binder carefully and slipped it back. Every sound amplified the rustle of paper, the distant buzz of fluorescent lights, the rush of blood in my ears. When I turned to leave, I caught my reflection in the glass door. I looked composed, calm even, but my eyes betrayed me wide, burning with the sharp clarity that only betrayal can bring. Lydia Moore Hale. The name echoed in my head like a warning. Whoever she was, she had already stepped into my life. And now, I intended to step into hers. That evening, the house smelled like rosemary and lemon. I had cooked his favorite dish, roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, the kind of meal that used to make him smile when he walked through the door. Old habits die hard. I told myself it was a test of sorts, though I wasn't sure what answer I wanted. When Ethan finally came home, the sound of his keys jingling in the lock made my stomach twist. He stepped inside, kissed my cheek, and smiled like everything was fine. "Smells incredible," he said, loosening his tie. His eyes flickered over me, quick, assessing, as if to gauge my mood. I forced a smile. "Long day?" "The usual," he replied, shrugging. "Meetings, emails, more meetings. You know how it is." I nodded, though the words sat strangely in the air. His tone was too even, too controlled, like a script he'd rehearsed. We sat at the table. The candles flickered between us, shadows moving across his face. He ate with the calm precision of a man performing normalcy. I watched him, waiting for something, an expression, a tell, a crack in the mask. "How's the new project?" I asked lightly. "Still with the consulting team?" He looked up sharply, then smiled, quick and thin. "Yeah. A joint venture, I think. It's been chaos." I stirred my drink slowly. "I met someone from consulting today," I said, watching him. "She seemed familiar." His fork paused mid-air for half a second, then clattered softly onto his plate. "Really?" he said too casually. "Who?" I shrugged. "Didn't catch her name." His shoulders eased. He smiled again, that easy charm returning. "You always notice people more than I do." The lie slid from his tongue like second nature. I wanted to ask more, to corner him with questions he couldn't dodge, but something stopped me. Maybe I wanted to see just how far he'd go. "You've been working so hard lately." I said instead. Don't forget, tomorrow's our anniversary. He blinked, just for a moment, as if he'd forgotten. Then he recovered quickly. Of course I haven't, he said, reaching for my hand. His touch was warm, but it felt like contact through glass. I smiled back, pretending to believe him. But beneath the soft candlelight, the silence between us grew heavier, thick with all the words we didn't say. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the curtains in slow golden ribbons. I lay still, listening to the faint sound of running water from the bathroom. Ethan was humming a habit he'd picked up recently. It used to comfort me, that small sign of contentment. Now, it made my stomach knot. I rolled over and closed my eyes, pretending to sleep as he stepped out, adjusting his cufflinks, the new cologne surrounding him in a quiet cloud. "Happy anniversary," he said softly, leaning down to kiss my forehead. His tone was practiced, like an actor reciting a line. He handed me a small box tied with a silver ribbon. I sat up slowly, forcing a sleepy smile. "You remembered?" "Of course," he said quickly. "Open it." Inside was a delicate silver bracelet. Simple, elegant, impersonal. The kind of thing you might pick up in a hurry. The price tag was still tucked beneath the foam lining. I turned it over, the tag brushing my thumb like a secret it didn't want to keep. "It's beautiful," I said, though my voice felt far away. He smiled, relieved, kissed me again, and left for work with the same casual confidence as always. The door closed behind him with a soft click. I sat there for a long time, the bracelet glinting dully in the morning light. It was lovely, too generic, not my taste. I wore gold, always had. He knew that. He'd chosen silver once, years ago, and I'd told him it made me look washed out. He'd never made the same mistake again until now. I ran my finger over the tag, tracing the name of the jewelry store downtown. A memory flickered. A small white bag in his briefcase a few weeks ago. One he'd brushed off as a gift for a client. My chest tightened. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it wasn't. I stood, the bracelet still in my hand, and looked around our bedroom, neat, polished, perfectly in place. But everything suddenly felt foreign, like a set built to imitate a life that wasn't real anymore. The tag crinkled softly between my fingers. I smiled to myself, the kind of smile that hides more than it shows. Whoever that bracelet had been meant for, it was mine now. And so was the truth I was going to find. That night, the clock glowed 1:47 a.m. in dim blue light, but sleep refused to come. I lay on my side, staring at the hollow space beside me. Ethan was working late again, or so he'd said. His half of the bed was untouched, cold. The silence in the house was so complete it felt alive, the hum of the refrigerator, the whisper of wind against the window, the echo of my own heartbeat. My mind wouldn't stop replaying everything. The other Mrs. Hale, the blonde woman from consulting, the forgotten tag on the bracelet. Each thought wove into the next, until the line between memory and suspicion blurred. I got up quietly, my bare feet pressing into the cool wooden floor. The house felt foreign, filled with shadows I no longer trusted. His briefcase sat by the door, right where he always left it. I hesitated just for a second, then knelt down and unlatched it. The smell of leather and his cologne hit me instantly. Inside were the usual things: contracts, notes, a half-empty pen, receipts, all normal, almost too normal. I sifted through the folders until something metallic caught the light. 2 access keycards clipped together. One had his company's logo etched across it, the one I'd seen countless times before. The other was plain, unmarked, newer, no logo, no name. I held it between my fingers, the plastic warm from where it had rested against his papers. My stomach tightened. I had been in that building enough times to know that different departments had separate access levels. A second keycard meant a second space somewhere I'd never been invited to see. I glanced toward the door, half expecting him to appear, but the silence held. I slipped the plain card into my robe pocket, leaving everything else untouched. As I closed the briefcase, I noticed a faint lipstick smudge on one of the documents, soft pink. the kind I never wore. My breath caught, a quiet, shaking sound that filled the empty room. I told myself it could mean nothing. It could mean everything. I placed the briefcase back exactly as it had been, every latch and fold identical, then stood there in the dark for a long moment, the keycard heavy in my hand. I didn't feel like a wife anymore. I felt like a detective in a life I thought I understood. By morning, I had made up my mind. Whatever waited behind that second keycard, I needed to see it with my own eyes. Ethan moved through his morning routine as if nothing had changed. Coffee in hand, tie knotted perfectly, phone pressed to his ear. "Big meeting today," he said, not looking at me. I nodded, pretending to believe him. "Don't work too hard," I murmured, the words automatic. He kissed my cheek, his lips barely grazing my skin, then walked out the door. I counted to 30 before grabbing my keys. The city was just waking as I followed his car, staying several lengths behind. The early light painted everything gold and cold. He drove the familiar route downtown, turning into the same glass building where all of this had started. I parked across the street, watching as he greeted the security guard, his smile practiced and easy. Then he scanned his card and stepped inside. For a moment, I sat there, my fingers gripping the steering wheel, heart pounding hard enough to shake me. Finally, I got out. The lobby doors opened easily, the scent of coffee and air conditioning hitting me like déjà vu. I lingered by a seating area, pretending to check my phone. Through the glass partition ahead, I saw Ethan at the elevator, tapping his keycard against the panel. But instead of heading to his usual floor, he pressed a different number 1 I didn't recognize. The doors closed before I could move. A restricted floor. I glanced toward the directory on the wall. Floors 10 through 14 were labeled executive offices, but the one he'd chosen wasn't listed at all. I walked to the reception desk, keeping my voice steady. "Hi, I'm here for a delivery to consulting. What floor is that again?" The woman behind the counter barely looked up. "Restricted access," she said briskly. "Only authorized personnel allowed." My pulse quickened. Consulting. Of course. I thanked her and walked away slowly, every nerve alive with realization. The elevator light blinked faintly at that same unlisted floor, a space not meant for me or anyone who might ask questions. Outside, I leaned against the wall, the morning sun sharp against my eyes. Whatever was up there, Ethan was guarding it. And for the first time, I knew this wasn't just about another woman. It was about a life he'd built in secret, and I had just found the first door that might open it. 2 days later, I stopped waiting for courage. It came quietly, in the middle of pouring coffee, when the thought struck me that I couldn't keep living half blind. By the time Ethan left for work, I had already made my plan. I waited an hour before driving downtown, parking in the same shadowed corner near his building. The second keycard was tucked inside my coat pocket, burning against my skin like a secret I wasn't supposed to hold. I kept my head down as I entered through the revolving doors, offering a polite smile to no one in particular. The security guard barely glanced at me this time. My pulse quickened as I crossed the marble floor and stepped into the elevator. The mirrored walls reflected a woman I hardly recognized, composed, calm, but with eyes sharp enough to cut glass. I slid the plain keycard through the reader, and the light turned green. The elevator began to move, silent except for the soft hum beneath my feet. When it stopped, the doors opened to a corridor I had never seen before. It was quieter up here, too quiet. The air smelled faintly of perfume and printer ink. I walked slowly, my heels soundless on the carpet, until I heard it. Laughter. Soft. Familiar. Intimate. His laughter. I turned the corner and froze. Through a glass wall, Ethan sat at a sleek conference table beside a woman, blonde, graceful, her hand resting casually near his. They were leaning close, whispering something that made her smile, and then I saw the ring. Silver, identical to mine, the same delicate band he'd slid onto my finger 5 years ago under a canopy of white lights and vows. My chest tightened painfully. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. They looked comfortable together, practiced. Like this wasn't a secret, but a routine. Ethan brushed a strand of her hair from her cheek, his touch familiar, almost tender. I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself. The glass between us might as well have been a mirror, him, living another life, and me finally seeing it reflected back. When she laughed again, I turned and walked away before my legs could give out. In the elevator, I caught my reflection once more. The woman staring back wasn't broken. She was furious and finally awake. That night, I sat on the couch in the dark. The glow of my phone, the only light in the room. I had typed her name into the search bar hours ago. Lydia Moore. It didn't take long. There she was, smiling, in company photos, her arm linked through Ethan's at a charity gala. My stomach dropped. The caption beneath the image read, "Ethan Hale and his wife, Lydia Moore Hale, attending the annual corporate awards dinner." I read it again, the words blurring. Wife, Lydia Moore Hale. The same name I'd seen printed in the company directory, now plastered across social media as if it were truth. I clicked through her posts, each one a small performance of a life that mirrored mine. There she was wearing the same ring, standing beside him at office functions, her smile wide and confident. My husband, her husband, the same man in two worlds. I scrolled further, my fingers trembling. Comments from coworkers filled the thread. Power couple. The Hales always make an impression. Such a beautiful pair. My breath caught at that word, pair, as if I had been erased entirely, replaced by someone who didn't even flinch at stealing my name. I found a short video next. Lydia laughing, camera in hand, calling out, "Ethan, look over here!" He turned, smiling, the same warm expression he used to reserve only for me. For a second, I almost couldn't look away. Then I felt the heat rise to my face, anger burning through shock. How many times had I believed him when he said he was working late? How many nights had he been with her instead, parading her through rooms where people knew his name, their name, as if I didn't exist? I opened one more post, a company retreat. Ethan's arm around her shoulders, their matching rings glinting in the sunlight. The caption read simply, "My husband, my best friend." I dropped the phone onto the table, my hands shaking. Around me, the silence felt heavier than ever, pressing against my ribs. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the betrayal itself, or how seamlessly he'd built a world without me. But one thing was clear now. Lydia Moore Hale might call herself Mrs. Hale. She might wear my ring, my husband's name, my life, but she was living on borrowed time. That evening, Ethan came home earlier than usual. The sound of the front door startled me. I'd been sitting in the dim light of the living room, turning the discovery over and over in my head. I could still see them, him and Lydia, standing too close, her hand brushing his arm, the glint of her ring catching the light, the same ring I wore. The same one he'd slid onto my finger 5 years ago, promising me forever. He walked in humming softly, as if nothing in the world was out of place. "You're home early," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Meeting got canceled," he said easily, loosening his tie. "Figured I'd surprise you for once." I smiled faintly, though my stomach twisted. "That's nice. Must be a relief to have some time away from consulting." His eyes flicked to mine, sharp for a second, then softened. "Consulting?" he repeated with a practiced laugh. "You've been doing your homework," I shrugged. "You've mentioned them a lot lately." "Well, they're clients, Clara," he said, still smiling, but I could feel the edges of tension beneath it. "Big account, they keep us busy." "Lydia keeps you busy too?" The words came out before I could stop them. His smile faltered, but only for a breath. "Who?" "Lydia Moore Hale," I said evenly. His eyes narrowed just enough for me to notice. "You've been looking at employee directories?" he asked, his tone suddenly careful. "That's not really your business, is it?" "You're right," I said softly. "Neither is your second wife." He froze, the mask slipping for the briefest second. Then he laughed loud, dismissive, forced. "Clara, come on! Is that what this is about? You've been reading gossip again?" "I saw her," I said quietly. "With you." He exhaled sharply, crossing his arms. "That was a client meeting. You know how rumors start. Lydia works for a partner firm. She's married to someone else, for God's sake." Then why does she wear my ring? I asked. His jaw clenched. You're imagining things. The calmness in his voice was almost worse than anger. You've been under a lot of stress. You overthink. That's always been your problem. I stared at him, feeling the ground tilt beneath me. You're lying, I whispered. And you're paranoid, he replied, kissing my forehead before walking past me. Let's not ruin another night over nothing. The door to his study clicked shut behind him, and I stood there, alone in the quiet, realizing how easily he could twist truth into smoke and how much I'd let him. 2 days later, I stopped by the office building again. I told myself it was to pick up the pieces, to confront him properly. But really, I just needed to see, to understand. The lobby looked the same as always: polished floors, echoing footsteps, cold air that smelled faintly of coffee and glass. I stood near the elevator, staring at the numbers glowing on the panel, when a voice behind me said softly, "Mrs. Hale?" I turned. It was the security guard, the same one who'd greeted me that first day with a smile and the words that had changed everything. He looked uneasy now, shifting from foot to foot. "Can we talk for a second?" he asked quietly. I nodded, and he led me to a corner of the lobby, away from prying eyes. His face was pale, his eyes flickering nervously toward the cameras above. "I owe you an apology," he said finally, his voice low. "About that day when I said his wife had just left. I didn't realize—" He swallowed hard. "Mr. Hale told us something different." "Different?" I asked, my pulse quickening. He hesitated, glancing around again before continuing. "He said his wife, his first wife, had been unwell. That she sometimes showed up here, confused. That if she came by, we were supposed to call him, not let her upstairs." The words hit me like a physical blow. My breath caught, and I felt myself sway. "He told you I was unstable?" The guard nodded, shame written all over his face. "He said you'd been separated for years, that you didn't take it well." I let out a sound, a broken, bitter laugh that didn't feel like it came from me. "He rewrote me," I whispered, "turned me into a ghost in my own life." The guard's eyes softened. "I'm sorry. If I'd known—" "You couldn't have," I said quickly, my voice trembling. "He's good at that, making lies sound like truth." For a long moment, we just stood there in the quiet hum of the lobby. Then I straightened, smoothing my coat. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "Please don't mention this to anyone." He nodded, guilt flickering across his face. I turned toward the glass doors, my reflection faint against the light outside, a woman erased, rewritten, and finally beginning to see the full outline of the story she'd been forced to live. Ethan hadn't just lied to me. He'd rewritten who I was. And now, I was done letting him control the narrative. After the guard's confession, I stopped feeling afraid. The shock had burned itself out, leaving behind something sharper, colder, more deliberate. Fear had turned into focus. If Ethan wanted to rewrite my life, I would write it back in ink he couldn't erase. That night, while he showered, I slipped into his study. The room was spotless, as always, every book in its place, every file labeled with mechanical precision. But I had learned something about him. Order was his camouflage. Beneath that perfection was where the rot lived. I opened his laptop, the screen flickering to life. The password was still our wedding date. He never imagined I'd have reason to use it against him. My hands shook as I navigated through his folders. Receipts, client notes, expense reports, nothing out of place, at first. But buried under layers of spreadsheets, I found something that didn't belong. A shared drive labeled Investments. Inside, transfers glared back at me, large amounts of money, funneled into an account under the name L.M. Hale, Lydia Moore Hale. Each transfer marked with a neat, unemotional note: joint property lease, mortgage coverage, shared renovation costs. My throat tightened as I scrolled further. There were scanned copies of contracts with both their names signed, side by side, like a mockery of mine. He hadn't just lied about her. He had built an entire life with her on paper, in banks, in the eyes of strangers. My marriage had become a decoy. I took photos of everything, my phone trembling in my grip. Every receipt, every document, every transaction. Proof that Ethan Hale had 2 wives and 1 truth, and it belonged to him alone. In a folder marked taxes, I found photos too. Ethan at company events, smiling beside Lydia. Her hand resting on his shoulder, his tie slightly crooked, his expression softened in a way I hadn't seen in years. There was one picture of them at a resort, Palm Springs, according to the caption. The same place he'd told me he'd gone for a conference last summer. I stared at the image until the colors blurred, then saved them all to a hidden drive. When I finally closed the laptop, I caught sight of my reflection in the darkened screen. I didn't look like a betrayed wife anymore. I looked like someone preparing for war. The next day, I walked into Ethan's building again. But this time I wasn't nervous. I had evidence. I had purpose. I wore calmness like armor. And when the receptionist smiled uncertainly, I smiled back with ease that wasn't real. "I'm here to see Maya from Human Resources," I said. It wasn't a lie. I'd found her name in one of the company directories, her contact listed beside employee inquiries. She was younger than I expected, late 20s, sharp eyes behind round glasses. Her expression shifted from polite to wary the moment I said Ethan's name. "You're his wife," she said quietly once we were alone in her small office. "The other one." The words hung there, heavy. I nodded. "You know about Lydia?" She hesitated, her hands fidgeting with a pen. "Everyone does," she said finally, her voice low. "But no one talks about it. Ethan's persuasive and dangerous to cross." I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "He's been pretending to be married to her, using her name, her records. I have proof." Maya's eyes widened. "You do?" I showed her a few of the photos on my phone, the bank transfers, the contracts, the resort picture. She let out a sharp breath. "God, I thought it was just gossip." "It's not," I said. "He's erased me, told people I'm unstable. I need someone on the inside. Someone who can help me without getting caught." She looked torn, glancing at the office door as if the walls themselves might be listening. "If anyone finds out, I won't let them," I promised. "You don't have to do much. Just help me access company files, records that connect him to Lydia's consulting division." She bit her lip, thinking. Finally, she nodded once. "You didn't hear this from me," she whispered, sliding a small card across the desk. "It's an access code. It'll get you into the internal archives temporarily. After that, you're on your own." I took it, feeling the weight of silent alliance settle between us. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. Maya hesitated, then said quietly, "Because I've seen what he does to women when they stop believing his version of the story." Her words sent a chill down my spine. When I left the office, I didn't look back. I had proof. I had an ally. And for the first time, Ethan wasn't the one writing the rules. 2 nights later, the city was slick with rain, when Maya and I sat parked outside a sleek, glass apartment complex downtown. The windshield wipers swept rhythmically, slicing through the mist. "You're sure this is the place?" I asked, staring up at the glowing windows. Maya nodded, her face pale in the dashboard light. I traced the address through the company's reimbursement files. Ethan listed it under corporate housing, but the lease is in his name and hers. She hesitated before saying the last word, as if Lydia's name might summon something dark into the car. I stared at the building, my pulse steady but cold. Somewhere behind those windows, my husband lived another life. "He spends every other week here," Maya added. "Late nights, weekends. I've seen the calendar entries." My hands tightened around the keycard. She'd slipped me a spare access code she'd risked her job to retrieve. I took a breath and opened the door. "Wait here," I said quietly. "If I'm not back in 30 minutes, leave. Clara, just go." The lobby was quiet when I entered, the marble floor gleaming under fluorescent lights. I kept my head down, swiping the keycard at the elevator. It beeped, then granted access. 20th floor. The doors opened into silence. Only the hum of distant traffic and the muted sound of rain against glass filled the air. I walked down the hall until I found it Unit 2003. The number looked ordinary, but my heart pounded so hard it almost drowned out the sound of the rain. I tried the door. It clicked open. Inside smelled faintly of lavender and something sharper his cologne. The lights were dim, the air still warm. They had been here recently. The apartment was elegant in a way that wasn't mine. Minimal, modern, impersonal. A navy throw on the couch, champagne flutes on the counter, 2 half-empty glasses still glistening with condensation. I stepped inside, scanning the space, every breath shallow. On the coffee table, there was a photo frame turned slightly toward the couch. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. Ethan and Lydia stood together at a rooftop party, his arm around her waist, both smiling. They looked married. The same easy confidence, the same posture, the same ring on her hand that I wore every day. I set the frame down gently, swallowing the taste of metal in my mouth. Somewhere behind me, thunder rolled. I turned toward the hallway, the faint sound of a dripping faucet echoing through the dark. He lived here, I realized. Not just visited, lived. This wasn't an affair. This was a second life. I moved deeper into the apartment, each step measured, deliberate. My reflection followed me in the glass windows, faint and ghost-like. In the bedroom, the truth surrounded me in silent mockery. The bed was made perfectly navy sheets, white pillows, a faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. On the dresser, framed photographs stood in neat rows, Ethan and Lydia on the beach, laughing. Ethan at a dinner table with her hand over his. Ethan holding a champagne glass beside her in front of a Christmas tree. In every image, they looked like a couple with years of history. There were no traces of me. Not one. My life, our memories, had been replaced, overwritten by theirs. I picked up a frame and stared at his smile. It was the same smile he used to give me, the one that had once meant safety, love, forever. Now it felt like a weapon. I set it down before I shattered it. My gaze caught on the small desk by the window. Papers lay neatly stacked beside a laptop. I sat, my pulse steady but heavy, and flipped through them. Bills, contracts, and then something that made my breath catch. A will. Dated 3 months ago. My eyes skimmed the words, and my vision blurred. I, Ethan Hale, leave my estate and assets to my wife, Lydia Moore Hale. My name appeared once next to the words former spouse, separated. The letters swam on the page. I reread them, my hands trembling. He hadn't just abandoned me. He had erased me legally. The man I'd built a life with had already buried me on paper. I heard the rain pick up outside, lashing against the windows, a relentless rhythm that matched my pulse. I opened a nearby drawer and found envelopes addressed to her. Not him, electric bills, bank statements, joint investments. Their names printed together as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I took photos of everything, methodical, calm. Proof was my only armor now. When I stood, the floor creaked softly, and I caught my reflection in the mirror across the room. I looked older, sharper, no longer fragile. Somewhere between betrayal and clarity, a strange kind of peace settled over me. Ethan thought he could replace me, rewrite me, remove me like an old chapter in a story. But I wasn't gone. I was here, in the middle of his lie, holding the evidence that would destroy him. I turned off the lights and left the apartment quietly. The sound of rain following me down the hall, a storm breaking, both outside and within. The plan began quietly, the way all dangerous things do. After that night in the apartment, I stopped reacting. I smiled at Ethan, laughed at his small jokes, made coffee the way he liked it, cream first, sugar last. He didn't notice the difference between love and strategy. He'd spent years convincing himself I'd never fight back. That was his first mistake. I called him that morning, my voice soft, steady. "Dinner tonight?" I asked. "Just us, we need to talk." There was a pause, the faint click of his pen on the other end. "Sure," he said finally. "That sounds nice." I could almost hear him calculating, wondering if I'd finally given up. I smiled to myself. 7 o'clock. I'll cook. He agreed easily, oblivious to the fact that I had already spoken to Maya. She had sent the files to Lydia through a secure address, every photo, every transfer, every lie. "She'll see it all," Maya had whispered earlier that day. "The money, the fake contracts, even the will. It's enough to ruin him twice over." "Good," I'd said. Then tonight, we let him ruin himself. The hours passed slowly, every tick of the clock like a countdown. I set the table with care, 2 plates, 2 glasses, a single candle flickering between them. Everything looked perfect, ordinary. The illusion of a home still intact. My phone buzzed once. "Message delivered," Maya texted. I stared at the screen, imagining Lydia's face as she opened the files. The shock, the realization that she wasn't his only wife but his second life. I wondered if she'd believed his stories about me, the unstable first wife, the woman he had to escape. Maybe she had. But tonight, she would see the truth for herself. I changed into a simple dress. Nothing dramatic. Just familiar enough to look like the wife I used to be. When Ethan came through the door, I wanted him to see calm. Not anger, not fear. Calm was what he'd never be able to control. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the house in gold that soon faded into shadow. I set the last dish on the table, the scent of rosemary filling the air. Then I sat down and waited. My hands were steady. My heartbeat wasn't. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, like the world holding its breath. I didn't know if Lydia would come. But if she did, Ethan's 2 worlds were about to collide, and I would be there to watch them burn. At first, I thought the knock at the door was Ethan, arriving early. But when I opened it, Lydia stood there. Her face was pale, eyes wide with disbelief, the storm outside catching in her blonde hair. She looked smaller than I expected, fragile, almost. For a long moment, we just stared at each other, 2 strangers who shared the same husband, the same lie. "You're," she began, her voice shaking. "Clara. I finished for her. The first wife. The only one, actually." Her lips parted, but no words came. I stepped aside. "Come in." She hesitated, then crossed the threshold, her heels clicking softly against the floor. "You saw the files," I said. She nodded, clutching her purse like it was armor. "He told me you were gone, that you'd left him, that you were unstable?" I finished bitterly. Her eyes flickered with guilt. "Yes." I nodded slowly. "He likes that story. It makes him the victim." The sound of tires on gravel made both our heads turn. Headlights cut through the rain, sweeping across the living room. Lydia took a step back. "He's here," she whispered. I gave her a small, steady smile. "Good, you should stay." The front door opened a moment later. Ethan stepped inside, shaking water from his coat, his expression weary until he saw her. He froze. "Lydia?" His voice cracked on her name. Then he saw me. "Clara." The color drained from his face. "What is this?" I said nothing. I just sat at the table, hands folded neatly in front of me, watching him. Lydia's hands trembled as she pulled a folder from her bag, the one Maya had sent her. She threw it onto the table. Paper spilled out, copies of the transfers, the will, the photos. "You told me she was crazy," she said, her voice shaking. "You told me you were divorced." Ethan's mouth opened, but no sound came. I leaned back, silent, letting the weight of her words settle. "Lydia, please," he began, his tone shifting, pleading, rehearsed. "You don't understand." "No," I said quietly. "She understands perfectly. Now we both do." He turned toward me, eyes wild. "You planned this," he hissed. "You think you can humiliate me?" "I don't need to," I said, my voice calm, almost gentle. "You've done that yourself." The candle flickered between us, casting shadows across his face, one man split in 2, both lies collapsing into one truth. For the first time in years, I saw fear in his eyes. And it was beautiful. For a long, brittle moment, no one moved. The room was silent, except for the rain tapping against the windows. Steady and relentless. Then Lydia spoke first, her voice trembling, but louder now, breaking through the quiet. "You made me believe she didn't exist," she said, each word a blade. "You said she was sick, that you were protecting yourself. God, Ethan, you called her dangerous. Ethan reached for her hand, but she pulled back like his touch burned. Lydia, listen. Don't, she snapped. Every single thing you said was a lie. She turned toward me, tears streaking her face. You should hate me, she whispered. I shook my head slowly. He's the one who wanted us to. Ethan's voice cracked with practiced desperation. I was trying to protect both of you. It wasn't supposed to go this far. His words dissolved into the air between us, hollow, meaningless. Lydia let out a laugh, sharp, bitter, half a sob. Protect us, she said. You built 2 lives like some kind of game, Ethan. You took my money, our house, our name, and used it to keep your first marriage alive on paper. You're a fraud. He tried to step closer, but she shoved the folder of evidence into his chest. Papers scattered to the floor, contracts, photos, receipts, the physical remains of his double life. He stared at them, lips moving but no sound coming out, like he couldn't decide which lie to grab first. Clara, he said finally, his voice breaking into something small. Please, you don't have to do this. I tilted my head. Do what, Ethan? Tell the truth? His shoulders slumped, all the arrogance leaking out of him at once. Lydia's eyes were blazing now. I'll make sure everyone knows, she said. Your company, your clients, everyone. You'll ruin me, he whispered. No, she said. You did that yourself. She grabbed her coat and stormed out, the sound of the door slamming echoing like thunder. The rain swallowed her footsteps, leaving only silence. Ethan turned toward me, empty now, deflated. I never meant to hurt you, he said. You just stopped being enough. The words landed like a slap, but I didn't flinch. No, Ethan, I said quietly. You stopped being real. He sank into a chair, surrounded by the debris of his lies, his face pale and drawn. For years he'd written the story of our lives, every word shaped to his advantage. But now, sitting in the ruin of his own making, the pen was no longer in his hand. I watched him unravel not with fury, but with finality. Outside, the rain began to ease, and I felt something inside me do the same. The morning after the confrontation, the world looked strangely calm. The sun came out, washing the neighborhood in soft light, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But beneath that calm, everything had shifted. Ethan's company exploded with whispers before noon. Maya called to tell me the board had received Lydia's files, the same evidence she'd forwarded the night before. Fraud, embezzlement, falsified records, words that would take on lives of their own in boardrooms and legal memos. And then the one that would destroy him completely. Bigamy. He's finished, Maya said quietly over the phone. They're freezing his accounts. There'll be an investigation. Good, I replied. I didn't ask for updates after that. I didn't need them. I already knew how the story ended. By evening, reporters were circling his building downtown. Lydia had released a statement through her firm, short and sharp, confirming their relationship and denouncing his deception. The headlines began to spread. Corporate executive living double life under investigation. His face appeared beneath the words like a mask stripped of its expression. I didn't feel vindicated. Just clean. Like something heavy had finally lifted from my chest. I boxed up his things that afternoon, his books, his ties, the cufflinks he wore to impress no one but himself. Each object felt lighter than it should have, like it no longer belonged to the world I lived in. When the last box was sealed, I carried it to the porch. The sky was streaked with the last light of day, and I stood there for a moment, breathing. Maya had offered to help me testify if it came to that, but I wasn't sure I wanted to. I didn't need revenge anymore. I just needed distance. I didn't call Ethan. I didn't answer when he tried to. Whatever he said now would be another version of the truth, and I was done listening. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat at the empty dinner table, and looked around the quiet house. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel hollow. It felt like peace. Ethan's world was burning, and I didn't have to watch. I had already walked away. 2 weeks later, the envelope arrived thick, official, and heavy with the sound of an ending. My lawyer, Daniel, slid it across the table toward me with a small, satisfied nod. Everything's in here, he said. The petition, the supporting documentation, the financial attachments. You'll never have to speak to him again. The paper smelled faintly of ink and closure. I opened the file, the legal jargon dancing before my eyes. Each page felt like a mirror reflecting a life I no longer recognized. Joint accounts, shared assets, property lists. Evidence that once tied us together, now methodically untied. Daniel spoke gently, his voice steady but firm. We included the evidence of his financial manipulation, the transfers to Lydia, the fake leases. It's irrefutable. I nodded, tracing my name printed in bold. Clara Hale, plaintiff. I hadn't realized how powerful it would feel to see those words in writing. I had spent years living as a footnote in Ethan's story. Now I was reclaiming authorship. He'll contest, Daniel added. He won't win. I looked up at him. He's already lost, I said quietly. Signing the final page felt nothing like I expected. No triumph, no tears, just stillness. Like the quiet after a storm when the air smells clean again. When it was done, Daniel gathered the papers, his movements efficient, almost ceremonial. You're free now, he said. The words landed gently, but deeply. Free. It wasn't about marriage or revenge anymore. It was about breathing, without checking if someone was watching. About walking into my own home, without wondering who else had been living there in my absence. That night, I opened a window and let the spring air drift in. The world outside was soft again, the faint sound of cars in the distance, the hum of life going on. On the table beside me sat the signed documents, my handwriting neat and steady at the bottom of the last page. I thought about how Ethan used to say that I needed him to feel complete, but as I looked around the quiet room, I realized he had never completed me. He had only taken space I was finally reclaiming. For the first time in years, I slept through the night. No ghosts in my dreams, only the echo of my own name, unchained. By the following week, Ethan's downfall was no longer a secret. It was news. Headlines carried his name like a cautionary tale. Ethan Hale resigns amid fraud and misconduct allegations. I saw the article by accident, a link forwarded by a colleague, followed by the obligatory, "I'm so sorry. I had no idea." The photo accompanying it showed him leaving the office, shoulders hunched, his face hidden behind dark sunglasses. For a man who thrived on control, the image was poetic. He looked small. The firm moved quickly after that. Lydia filed her own lawsuit, breach of contract, financial deception, emotional damages. Her statement was brief but damning. I was deceived both personally and professionally. The man I knew never existed. Maya texted me once the story broke. "They're cleaning house, he's done." I thanked her, but I didn't ask for more. I didn't need to see his ruin. I'd already lived through it once. Now it belonged to the world, the boardrooms, the press, the people who had once worshipped his composure. Justice had found its voice without me having to raise mine. I went for a walk that afternoon, the city alive with motion. Strangers brushed past, unaware that I was once part of the scandal lighting up their screens. That anonymity felt like freedom. I passed a cafe and caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. Calm, steady, unafraid. For months, I had lived in the shadow of Ethan's lies. Now, the sunlight found me again. I didn't speak publicly. I didn't post or comment. Silence, I realized, was its own form of power. Let him explain. Let him squirm beneath the weight of his own words. My quiet would be louder than anything he could say. That evening, I returned home and found the stack of newsprint sitting on my doorstep. The Hale scandal. How one man built two lives. I picked it up, then smiled faintly before tossing it into the recycling bin. The story was finished. I didn't need to read it. My truth had already been written not in headlines, not in rumors, but in every choice I'd made to walk away. For the first time, my silence wasn't surrender. It was victory. I didn't plan to go back, but sometimes closure pulls you toward the places where everything began. The building looked smaller now, stripped of the intimidation it once held. The glass facade reflected a cloudless afternoon, all sharp edges softened by light. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, remembering that first visit, the bouquet of white lilies, the confusion, the quiet beginning of the end. Then I stepped through the same doors, the same faint scent of coffee and air conditioning greeting me like a ghost of the past. The lobby was quiet. New faces at reception, unfamiliar voices echoing faintly down the hall. And then, I saw him, the same security guard from that day. He looked older, a little grayer around the temples, but when he saw me, his posture straightened instantly. His expression changed from surprise to something gentle, almost reverent. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Hale," he said softly, his tone carrying none of the awkward hesitation from before. Just respect. The sound of it caught me off guard. Mrs. Hale. My name, not borrowed, not contested, just mine. I smiled faintly. "Afternoon," I said. "It's been a while." He nodded, his eyes kind. "It's good to see you doing well." I hesitated, then returned the nod. "It's good to be doing well." The elevator doors opened behind me, releasing a burst of chatter from a group of employees. Life had moved on. The company had recovered, rebuilt, rebranded. Ethan's name had been erased from every wall, every plaque. It was as if he had never existed here at all. I walked a slow circle around the lobby, each step echoing softly. The marble floors, the sleek glass walls, everything looked the same, yet different. The fear, the confusion, the weight I'd once carried here had vanished. In its place was calm, the kind that only comes after surviving something that should have broken you. As I turned to leave, the guard called out gently, "Take care, ma'am." I met his eyes, smiling for real this time. "I already am." And with that, I walked toward the exit, the sunlight spilling through the glass doors ahead. This place no longer held my ghosts. It was just a building now, a monument to everything I'd learned about illusion and everything I'd finally left behind. Outside, the afternoon light shimmered against the street, warm and forgiving. I crossed to the small florist on the corner, the same one where I'd once bought the lilies that started it all. The woman behind the counter recognized me faintly and offered a polite smile. "Something special today?" she asked. I looked at the array of blooms, roses, orchids, tulips, and my eyes settled on a single white lily. "Just one," I said. "Something simple." She wrapped it carefully in brown paper and tied it with a ribbon. I paid, thanked her, and walked back across the street, the flower resting lightly in my hand. The lobby was quiet when I entered again. I approached the reception desk, the same place where the guard's innocent words had fractured my world years ago. This time, there was no trembling, no questions. Only peace. I placed the flower on the counter, the white petals soft against the polished surface. "For who?" the new receptionist asked, glancing up. I smiled. "For me." She blinked, then nodded, returning to her work. I turned and looked around one last time. The building gleamed in the afternoon light, alive with movement, and noise, people chasing meetings, schedules, ambitions. The kind of life that once consumed Ethan, and almost consumed me too. I took a deep breath and let the air fill my lungs, clean and light. The flower stood there, small but radiant, the quietest of symbols, love, grief, and rebirth intertwined. I thought of the woman I used to be, the one who had stood here with a bouquet full of hope, waiting for a version of love that never existed. I thought of the woman who had found truth instead and learned to survive it. As I stepped back out into the sunlight, the wind lifted slightly, brushing my hair across my face. I smiled, the warmth of the day touching my skin. For years I'd carried pain like a shadow. Now, it was just light. The flower stayed behind, not for him, not for the past, but for me. A reminder that some endings are just beginnings in disguise. This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.